Domestication. Domestication is a multi-generational mutualistic relationship in which an animal species, such as humans or leafcutter ants, takes over control and care of another species, such as sheep or fungi, to obtain from them a steady supply of resources, such as meat, milk, or labor. The process is gradual and geographically diffuse, based on trial and error. Domestication affected genes for behavior in animals, making them less aggressive. In plants, domestication affected genes for morphology, such as increasing seed size and stopping the shattering of cereal seed heads. Such changes both make domesticated organisms easier to handle and reduce their ability to survive in the wild. Dogs and sheep were among the first animals to be domesticated, at least 15,000 and 11,000 years ago respectively. 1. Rice was domesticated in China, some 9,000 years ago. 2. The first animal to be domesticated by humans was the dog, as a commensal, at least 15,000 years ago. Other animals, including goats, sheep, and cows, were domesticated around 11,000 years ago. Among birds, the chicken was first domesticated in East Asia, seemingly for cockfighting, some 7,000 years ago. The horse came under domestication around 5,500 years ago in Central Asia as a working animal. Among invertebrates, the silkworm and the western honeybee were domesticated over 5,000 years ago for silk and honey, respectively. The domestication of plants began around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago with cereals such as wheat and barley in the Middle East, alongside crops such as lentil, pea, chickpea, and flax. Beginning around 10,000 years ago, indigenous peoples in the Americas began to cultivate peanuts, squash, maize, potatoes, cotton, and cassava. Rice was first domesticated in China some about 9,000 years ago. In Africa, crops such as sorghum were domesticated. Agriculture developed in some 13 centers around the world, domesticating different crops and animals. 3 groups of insects, namely ambrosia beetles, leafcutter ants, and fungus-growing termites have independently domesticated species of fungi, on which they feed. In the case of the termites, the relationship is a fully obligate symbiosis on both sides. Definitions. Domestication, not to be confused with the taming of an individual animal. 3, 4, 5 is from the Latin domesticus, belonging to the house. 6. The term remained loosely defined until the 21st century, when the American archaeologist Melinda A. Zetter defined it as a long-term relationship in which humans take over control and care of another organism to gain a predictable supply of a resource, resulting in mutual benefits. She noted further that it is not synonymous with agriculture since agriculture depends on domesticated organisms but does not automatically result from domestication. 7. Diagram of the process of domestication is a process where one species actively manages another to obtain resources or services, as defined by Michael D. Beruganin 8. Michael D. Beruganin notes that domestication has been hard to define, despite the instinctual consensus that it means the plants and animals found under the care of humans that provide us with benefits and which have evolved under our control. 8. He comments that insects such as termites, ambrosia beetles, and leafcutter ants have domesticated some species of fungi, and notes further that other groups such as weeds and commensals have wrongly been called domesticated. 8. Starting from Zetter's definition, Beruganin proposes a broad definition, a coevolutionary process that arises from a mutualism, in which one species, the domesticator, constructs an environment where it actively manages both the survival and reproduction of another species, the domesticate, in order to provide the former with resources and/or services. 8. He comments that this adds niche construction to the activities of the domesticator. 8. Domestication syndrome is a suite of phenotypic traits that arose during the initial domestication process in which distinguish crops from their wild ancestors. 9. 10. It can also mean a set of differences now observed in domesticated mammals, not necessarily reflecting the initial domestication process. The changes include increased docility and tameness, coat coloration, reductions in tooth size, craniofacial morphology, ear and tail form e.g., floppy ears, estrous cycles, levels of adrenocorticotropic hormone and neurotransmitters, prolongations in juvenile behavior, and reductions in brain size and of particular brain regions. 11. Cause and timing. The domestication of animals and plants was triggered by the climatic and environmental changes that occurred after the peak of the last glacial maximum and which continue to this present day. These changes made obtaining food by hunting and gathering difficult. 12. The first animal to be domesticated was the dog at least 15,000 years ago. 1. The Younger Dryas 12,900 years ago was a period of intense cold and aridity that put pressure on humans to intensify their foraging strategies but did not favor agriculture. By the beginning of the Holocene 11,700 years ago, a warmer climate and increasing human populations led to small-scale animal and plant domestication and an increased supply of food. 13. Timeline of some major domestication events. Event center of origin purpose date, years ago. Foraging for wild grains Asia food greater than 23,014, dog Eurasia commensal greater than 15,001, wheat, barley Near East food 13,000 11,014, flax Near East textiles 13,000 11,015, goat, sheep, pig, cow Near East, South Asia food 11,000 10,001, rice China food 9,002, chicken East Asia cockfighting 7,016, horse Central Asia draft, riding 5,501, honeybee ancient Egypt honey greater than 5,017. The appearance of the domestic dog in the archaeological record, at least 15,000 years ago, was followed by domestication of livestock and of crops such as wheat and barley, the invention of agriculture, and the transition of humans from foraging to farming in different places and times across the planet. 1. 18, 19, 20, for instance, small-scale trial cultivation of cereals began some 28,000 years ago at the Ohala II site in Israel. 21. In the Fertile Crescent 11,000 10,000 years ago, zoo archaeology indicates that goats, pigs, sheep, and taurine cattle were the first livestock to be domesticated. 2,000 years later, Hump Zebu cattle were domesticated in what is today Baluchistan and Pakistan. In East Asia 8,000 years ago, pigs were domesticated from wild boar genetically different from those found in the Fertile Crescent. 1. The cat was domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, perhaps 10,000 years ago. 22. From European wildcats, possibly to control rodents that were damaging stored food. 23. Centers of origin and spread of agriculture in the Neolithic Revolution is understood in 2003. 24. Animals. Desirable traits. Domesticated animals tend to be smaller and less aggressive than their wild counterparts. Many have other domestication syndrome traits like shorter muzzles. 25. Skulls of gray wolf, left, Chihuahua dog, right. The domestication of vertebrate animals is the relationship between non-human vertebrates and humans who have an influence on their care and reproduction. 7. In his 1868 book The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, Charles Darwin recognized a small number of traits that made domestic species different from their wild ancestors. He was also the first to recognize the difference between conscious selective breeding in which humans directly select for desirable traits and unconscious selection, in which traits evolve as a byproduct of natural selection or from selection on other traits. 26, 27, 28. There is a difference between domestic and wild populations. Some of these differences constitute the domestication syndrome, traits presumed essential in the early stages of domestication, while others represent later improvement traits. 9, 29, 30. Domesticated mammals in particular tend to be smaller and less aggressive than their wild counterparts. Other common traits are floppy ears, a smaller brain, and a shorter muzzle. 25. Domestication traits are generally fixed within all domesticates, and were selected during the initial episode of domestication of that animal or plant, whereas improvement traits are present only in a proportion of domesticates, though they may be fixed in individual breeds or regional populations. 29, 30, 31. Certain species, and certain individuals within those species, make better candidates for domestication because of their behavioral characteristics. 32, 33, 34, 35. 1. The size and organization of their social structure. 32, 2. The availability and the degree of selectivity in their choice of mates. 32. 3. The ease and speed with which the parents bond with their young, and the maturity and mobility of the young at birth. 32. 4. The degree of flexibility in diet and habitat tolerance. 32. 5. Responses to humans and new environments, including reduced flight response and reactivity to external stimuli. 32. Mammals. Wild dogs were commensals, and sheep were kept for food. Camels were domesticated as working animals. 32. Beginnings of mammal domestication involved a protracted coevolutionary process with multiple stages along different pathways. There are 3 proposed major pathways that most mammal domesticates followed into domestication. 32, 30, 36. 1. Commensals, adapted to human niche, e.g., dogs, cats, possibly pigs. 32. 2. Prey animals sought for food, e.g., sheep, goats, cattle, water buffalo, yak, pig, reindeer, llama and alpaca. 32. 3. Animals targeted for draft and riding, e.g., horse, donkey, camel. 32. Humans did not intend to domesticate mammals from either the commensal or prey pathways, or at least they did not envision a domesticated animal would result from it. In both of those cases, humans became entangled with these species as the relationship between them intensified, and humans' role in their survival and reproduction gradually led to formalized animal husbandry. 30. Although the directed pathway for draft and riding animals proceeded from capture to taming, the other 2 pathways are not as goal-oriented, and archaeological records suggest that they took place over much longer time frames. 37. Unlike other domestic species selected primarily for production-related traits, dogs were initially selected for their behaviors. 38, 39. The dog was domesticated long before other animals. 40, 41. Becoming established across Eurasia before the end of the late Pleistocene era, well before agriculture. 40. The archaeological and genetic data suggests that long-term bidirectional gene flow between wild and domestic stocks, such as in donkeys, horses, New and Old World camelids, goats, sheep, and pigs, was common. 30, 36. Human selection for domestic traits likely counteracted the homogenizing effect of gene flow from wild boars into pigs, and created domestication islands in the genome. The same process may apply to other domesticated animals. 42, 43. The 2023 parasite-mediated domestication hypothesis suggests that endoparasites such as helminths and protozoa could have mediated the domestication of mammals. Domestication involves taming, which has an endocrine component, and parasites can modify endocrine activity in microRNAs. Genes for resistance to parasites might be linked to those for the domestication syndrome. It is predicted that domestic animals are less resistant to parasites than their wild relatives. 44, 45. Birds. Cockfight in Tamil Nadu, 2011. Red jungle fowl of Southeast Asia. The chicken was domesticated from the red jungle fowl, apparently for cockfighting, some 7,000 years ago. 16. Domesticated birds principally mean poultry, raised for meat and eggs. 46. Some galliforms chicken, turkey, guinea fowl and anseriforms waterfowl, ducks, geese, and swans. Also widely domesticated are caged birds such as songbirds and parrots. These are kept both for pleasure and for use in research. 47. The domestic pigeon has been used both for food and as a means of communication between far-flung places through the exploitation of the pigeon's homing instinct. Research suggests it was domesticated as early as 10,000 years ago. 48. Chicken fossils in China have been dated to 7,400 years ago. The chicken's wild ancestor is Gallus gallus, the red jungle fowl of Southeast Asia. The species appears to have been kept initially for cockfighting rather than for food. 16. Invertebrates. 2 insects, the silkworm and the western honeybee, have been domesticated for over 5,000 years, often for commercial use. The silkworm is raised for the silk threads wound around its pupal cocoon, the western honeybee, for honey, and, from the 20th century, for pollination of crops. 1749. Several other invertebrates have been domesticated, both terrestrial and aquatic, including some such as Drosophila melanogaster fruit flies and the freshwater cnidarian hydra for research into genetics and physiology. Few have a long history of domestication. Most are used for food or other products such as shellac and cochineal. The phyla involved are Cnidaria, platyhelminths for biological pest control, Annelida, mollusca, arthropoda, marine crustaceans as well as insects and spiders, and Echinodermata. While many marine mollusks are used for food, only a few have been domesticated, including squid, cuttlefish and octopus, all used in research on behavior and neurology. Terrestrial snails in the genera Helix are raised for food. Several parasitic or parasitoidal insects, including the fly Eucelatoria, the beetle Chrysalina, and the wasp Aphidus are raised for biological control. Conscious or unconscious artificial selection has many effects on species under domestication. Variability can readily be lost by inbreeding, selection against undesired traits, or genetic drift, while in Drosophila, variability in eclosion time when adults emerge has increased. 50. A honey hunter in a cave painting at Cuevas de la Araña, Spain, circa 8000–6000 BC. Sericulturalists. Preparing silkworms for spinning of the silk. The lac-bug Caryolaca has been kept for shellac resin. Snails being sold as food. Plants. Humans foraged for wild cereals, seeds, and nuts thousands of years before they were domesticated. Wild wheat and barley, for example, were gathered in the Levant at least 23,000 years ago. 5114 Neolithic societies in West Asia first began to cultivate and then domesticate some of these plants around 13,000 to 11,000 years ago. 14 The founder crops of the West Asian Neolithic included cereals emmer, einkorn wheat, barley pulses lentil, pea, chickpea, bittervetch, and flax. 1552 Other plants were independently domesticated in 13 centers of origin, subdivided into 24 areas, of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, the Middle East, South Asia, the Far East, and New Guinea and Wallacea. In some 13 of these regions people began to cultivate grasses and grains. 5354 Rice was first cultivated in East Asia. 55-56 sorghum was widely cultivated in sub-Saharan Africa, 57 wild peanuts, 58 squash, 58-59 cotton, 58 maize, 60 potatoes, 61 and cassava, 62 were domesticated in the Americas. 58. Continued domestication was gradual and geographically diffuse, happening in many small steps and spread over a wide area, on the evidence of both archaeology and genetics. 63. It was a process of intermittent trial and error and often resulted in diverging traits and characteristics. 64. Whereas domestication of animals impacted most on the genes that controlled behavior, that of plants impacted most on the genes that controlled morphology, seed size, plant architecture, dispersal mechanisms, and physiology, timing of germination or ripening. 32. 19. As in the domestication of wheat. Wild wheat shatters and falls to the ground to reseed itself when ripe, but domesticated wheat stays on the stem for easier harvesting. This change was possible because of random mutation in the wild populations at the beginning of wheat's cultivation. Wheat with this mutation was harvested more frequently and became the seed for the next crop. Therefore, without realizing it, early farmers selected for this mutation. The result is domesticated wheat, which relies on farmers for its reproduction and dissemination. 14. Farmers with wheat and cattle. Ancient Egyptian art 3,400 years ago. Wild wheat ears shatter when ripe, but domesticated wheat has to be threshed and winnowed, as shown to release and separate the grain. Photograph by Harold Weston, Oran, 1920s. Differences from wild plants. Einkorn wheat shatters into individual spikelets, making harvesting difficult. Domesticated cereals do not shatter. 65-66. Domesticated plants differ from their wild relatives in many ways, including lack of shattering such as of cereal ears, ripe heads. 14. Loss of fruit abscission. 66. Less efficient breeding system, e.g. without normal pollinating organs, making human intervention a requirement. Larger seeds with lower success in the wild. 14. Or even sterility, e.g. seedless fruits, and therefore only vegetative reproduction. 67-68. Better palatability, e.g. higher sugar content, reduced bitterness, better smell, and lower toxicity. 69-70. Edible part larger, e.g. cereal grains. 71. Or fruits. 66. Edible part more easily separated from non-edible part. 71. Increased number of fruits or grains. 66. Altered color, taste, and texture. 66. Day length independence. 66. Determinate growth. 66. Reduced or no vernalization. 66. Less seed dormancy. 66. Plant defenses against herbivora, such as thorns, spines, and prickles, poison, protective coverings, and sturdiness may have been reduced in domesticated plants. This would make them more likely to be eaten by herbivores and less protected by humans, but there is only weak support for most of this. 69. Farmers did select for reduced bitterness and lower toxicity and for food quality, which likely increased crop palatability to herbivores as to humans. 69. However, a survey of 29 plant domestications found that crops were as well defended against two major insect pests, beet armyworm and green peach aphid, both chemically, e.g. with bitter substances, and morphologically, e.g. with toughness, as their wild ancestors. 72. Changes to plant genome. Domesticated wheat evolved by repeated hybridization and polyploidy from multiple wild ancestors, increasing the size and evolvability of the genome. 73. During domestication, crop species undergo intense artificial selection that alters their genomes, establishing core traits that define them as domesticated, such as increased grain size. 1474. Comparison of the coding DNA of chromosome 8 in rice between fragrant and non-fragrant varieties showed that aromatic and fragrant rice, including basmati and jasmine, is derived from an ancestral rice domesticate that suffered a deletion in exon 7 which altered the coding for betaine aldehyde dehydrogenase BADH2. 75. Comparison of the potato genome with that of other plants located genes for resistance to potato blight caused by Phytophthora infestans. 76. In coconut, genomic analysis of 10 microsatellite loci of non-coding DNA found 2 episodes of domestication based on differences between individuals in the Indian Ocean and those in the Pacific Ocean. 77-78. The coconut experienced a founder effect, where a small number of individuals with low diversity founded the modern population, permanently losing much of the genetic variation of the wild population. 77. Population bottlenecks which reduced variation throughout the genome at some later date after domestication are evident in crops such as pearl millet, cotton, common bean and lima bean. 78. In wheat, domestication involved repeated hybridization and polyploidy. These steps are large and essentially instantaneous changes to the genome and the epigenome, enabling a rapid evolutionary response to artificial selection. Polyploidy increases the number of chromosomes, bringing new combinations of genes and alleles, which in turn enable further changes such as bichromosomal crossover. 73. Impact on plant microbiome. The microbiome, the collection of microorganisms inhabiting the surface and internal tissue of plants, is affected by domestication. This includes changes in microbial species composition, 79, 80, 81, and diversity. 82, 81, plant lineage, including speciation, domestication, and breeding, have shaped plant endophytes symbiosis in similar patterns as plant. Genes. 81, 83, 84, 85. Fungi. Cultivated mushrooms are widely grown for food. Several species of fungi have been domesticated for use directly as food, or in fermentation to produce foods and drugs. The cultivated mushroom Agaricus bisporus is widely grown for food. 86, the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae have been used for thousands of years to ferment beer and wine, and to leaven bread. 87. Mold fungi including penicillium are used to mature cheeses and other dairy products, as well as to make drugs such as antibiotics. 88. Effects on domestic animals. Selection of animals for visible traits may have undesired consequences for the genetics of domestic animals. 89. A side effect of domestication has been zoonotic diseases. For example, cattle have given humanity various viral poxes, measles, and tuberculosis, pigs and ducks have contributed influenza, and horses have brought the rhinoviruses. Many parasites, too, have their origins in domestic animals. 90. Alongside these, the advent of domestication resulted in denser human populations, which provided right conditions for pathogens. 90. Alongside these, the advent of domestication resulted in denser human populations, which provided right conditions for pathogens to reproduce, mutate, spread, and eventually find a new host in humans. 91. On society. Scholars have expressed widely differing viewpoints on domestication's effects on society. Anarcho-primitivism critiques domestication as destroying the supposed primitive state of harmony with nature in hunter-gatherer societies, and replacing it, possibly violently or by enslavement, with a social hierarchy as property and power emerged. 92. The dialectal naturalist Murray Bookchin has argued that domestication of animals, in turn, meant the domestication of humanity, both parties being unavoidably altered by their relationship with each other. 93. The sociologist David Nybert asserts that the domestication of animals involved violence against animals and damage to the environment. This, in turn, he argues, corrupted human ethics and paved the way for conquest, extermination, displacement, repression, coercion and slave servitude, gender subordination and sexual exploitation, and hunger. 94. On diversity. Industrialized agriculture on land with a simplified ecosystem. Domesticated ecosystems provide food, reduce predator and natural dangers, and promote commerce, but their creation has resulted in habitat alteration or loss, and multiple extinctions commencing in the late Pleistocene. 95. Domestication reduces genetic diversity of the domesticated population, especially of alleles of genes targeted by selection. 96. One reason is a population bottleneck created by artificially selecting the most desirable individuals to breed from. Most of the domesticated strain is then born from just a few ancestors, creating a situation similar to the founder effect. 97. Domesticated populations such as of dogs, rice, sunflowers, maize, and horses have an increased mutation load, as expected in a population bottleneck where genetic drift is enhanced by the small population size. Mutations can also be fixed in a population by a selective sweep. 98. 99. Mutational load can be increased by reduced selective pressure against moderately harmful traits when reproductive fitness is controlled by human management. 25. However, there is evidence against a bottleneck in crops, such as barley, maize, and sorghum, where genetic diversity slowly declined rather than showing a rapid initial fall at the point of domestication. 98. 97. Further, the genetic diversity of these crops was regularly replenished from the natural population. 98. Similar evidence exists for horses, pigs, cows, and goats. 25. Domestication by insects. At least 3 groups of insects, namely ambrosia beetles, leafcutter ants, and fungus-growing termites, have domesticated species of fungi. 8. 100. Ambrosia beetles. Ambrosia beetles in the weevil subfamily Scalinae and Platypodinae excavate tunnels in dead or stressed trees into which they introduce fungal gardens, their sole source of nutrition. After landing on a suitable tree, an ambrosia beetle excavates a tunnel in which it releases its fungal symbiont. The fungus penetrates the plant's xylem tissue, extracts nutrients from it, and concentrates the nutrients on and near the surface of the beetle gallery. Ambrosia fungi are typically poor wood degraders and instead utilize less demanding nutrients. 101. Symbiotic fungi produce and detoxify ethanol, which is an attractant for ambrosia beetles and likely prevents the growth of antagonistic pathogens and selects for other beneficial symbionts. 102. Ambrosia beetles mainly colonize wood of recently dead trees. 103. Leafcutter ants. The leafcutter ants are any of some 47 species of leaf-chewing ants in the genera Acromyrmexinata. The ants carry the discs of leaves that they have cut back to their nest, where they feed the leaf material to the fungi that they tend. Some of these fungi are not fully domesticated. The fungi farmed by Mycoscepter smithi constantly produce spores that are not useful to the ants, which eat fungal hyphae instead. The process of domestication by Atta ants, on the other hand, is complete. It took 30 million years. 104. Fungus-growing termites. Some 330 fungus-growing termite species of the subfamily Macrodermidinae cultivate Termitomyces fungi. Domestication occurred exactly once, 25 to 40 Maya. 8. 100. The fungi, described by Roger Hyman 1942, grow on combs formed from the termites, excreta, dominated by tough woody fragments. 105. The termites and the fungi are both obligate symbionts in the relationship. 106. Domestication by insects. Gallery of the ambrosia. Beetles Ilosandrus crassiusculus split open, with pupae and black fungus. The fungus decomposes materials in the wood, providing food for the beetles. Leafcutter ants add cephalotes carrying discs of leaf material back to their nest to feed to their domesticated fungus. Inside the nest of the fungus cultivating termite ancestroderms. Termitomyces hyme growing on comb, inside a termite mound. Termitomyces fungi are mutually dependent on Macrodermidinae termites for their survival. Anthrozoology. De novo domestication. A forest is an ecosystem characterized by a dense community of trees. 2 kinds of definitions of forest are used throughout the world, incorporating factors such as tree density, tree height, land use, legal standing, and ecological function. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO) defines a forest as land spanning more than 0.5 hectares with trees higher than 5 meters and a canopy cover of more than 10%, or trees able to reach these thresholds in situ. It does not include land that is predominantly under agricultural or urban use. 6. Using this definition, Global Forest Resources Assessment 2020 found that forests covered 4.06 billion hectares, 10.0 billion acres, 40.6 million square kilometers, 15.7 million square miles, or approximately 31% of the world's land area in 2020. 7. The Amazon rainforest alongside the Solomos River, a tropical rainforest. These forests are the most biodiverse and productive ecosystems in the world. Proportion and distribution of global forest area by climatic domain, 2021. Forests are the largest terrestrial ecosystems of Earth by area, and are found around the globe. 8.45% of forest land is in the tropical latitudes. The next largest share of forests are found in subarctic climates, followed by temperate and subtropical zones. 9. Forests account for 75% of the gross primary production of the Earth's biosphere, and contain 80% of the Earth's plant biomass. Net primary production is estimated at 21.9 gigatons of biomass per year for tropical forests, 8.1 for temperate forests, and 2.6 for boreal forests. 8 forests form distinctly different biomes at different latitudes and elevations, and with different precipitation and evapotranspiration rates. 10. These biomes include boreal forests in subarctic climates, tropical moist forests and tropical dry forests around the equator, and temperate forests at the middle latitudes. Forests form in areas of the earth with high rainfall, while drier conditions produce a transition to savanna. However, in areas with intermediate rainfall levels, forest transitions to savanna rapidly when the percentage of land that is covered by trees drops below 40 to 45%. 11. Research conducted in the Amazon rainforest shows that trees can alter rainfall rates across a region, releasing water from their leaves in anticipation of seasonal rains to trigger the wet season early. Because of this, seasonal rainfall in the Amazon begins 2 to 3 months earlier than the climate would otherwise allow. 12. Deforestation in the Amazon and anthropogenic climate change hold the potential to interfere with this process, causing the forest to pass a threshold where it transitions into savanna. 14. Deforestation threatens many forest ecosystems. Deforestation occurs when humans remove trees from a forested area by cutting or burning, either to harvest timber or to make way for farming. Most deforestation today occurs in tropical forests. The vast majority of this deforestation is because of the production of four commodities: wood, beef, soy, and palm oil. 15. Over the past 2,000 years, the area of land covered by forest in Europe has been reduced from 80% to 34%. Large areas of forest have also been cleared in China and in the eastern United States, 16 in which only 0.1% of land was left undisturbed. 17. Almost half of Earth's forest area, 49%, is relatively intact, while 9% is found in fragments with little or no connectivity. Tropical rainforests and boreal coniferous forests are the least fragmented, whereas subtropical dry forests and temperate oceanic forests are among the most fragmented. Only 80% of the world's forest area is found in patches larger than 1 million hectares, 2.5 million acres. The remaining 20% is located in more than 34 million patches around the world, the vast majority less than 1,000 hectares, 2,500 acres, in size. 9. Human society and forests can affect one another positively or negatively. 18. Forests provide ecosystem services to humans and serve as tourist attractions. Forests can also affect people's health. Human activity, including unsustainable use of forest resources, can negatively affect forest ecosystems. 19. Definitions. Forest in the Scottish Highlands. Although the word forest is commonly used, there is no universally recognized precise definition, with more than 800 definitions of forest used around the world. 5. Although a forest is usually defined by the presence of trees, under many definitions an area completely lacking trees may still be considered a forest if it grew trees in the past, will grow trees in the future. 20. Or was legally designated as a forest regardless of vegetation type. 21. 22. There are three broad categories of definitions of forest in use: administrative, land use, and land cover. 21. Administrative definitions are legal designations, and may not reflect the type of vegetation that grows upon the land. An area can be legally designated forest, even if no trees grow on it. 21. Land use definitions are based on the primary purpose the land is used for. Under a land use definition, any area used primarily for harvesting timber, including areas that have been cleared by harvesting, disease, fire, or for the construction of roads and infrastructure, are still defined as forests, even if they contain no trees. Land cover definitions define forests based upon the density of trees, area of tree canopy cover, or area of the land occupied by the cross-section of tree trunks basal area meeting a particular threshold. 21. This type of definition depends upon the presence of trees sufficient to meet the threshold, or at least of immature trees that are expected to meet the threshold once they mature. 21. Under land cover definitions, there is considerable variation on where the cutoff points are between a forest, woodland, and savanna. Under some definitions, to be considered a forest requires very high levels of tree canopy cover, from 60% to 100%, 23 which excludes woodlands and savannas, which have a lower canopy cover. Other definitions consider savannas to be a type of forest, and include all areas with tree canopies over 10%. 20. Some areas covered with trees are legally defined as agricultural areas, for example Norway spruce plantations, under Austrian forest law, when the trees are being grown as Christmas trees and are below a certain height. Etymology. Since the 13th century, the Dolomites forest in Poland has had special use and protection. In this view from space, different coloration can indicate different functions. 24. The word forest derives from the Old French forest, also forest denoting forest, vast expanse covered by trees. Forest was first introduced into English as the word denoting wild land set aside for hunting. 25 without necessarily having trees on the land. 26. Possibly borrowing, probably via Frankish or Old High German, of the medieval Latin forsta, denoting open wood. Carolingian scribes first used forsta in the capitularies of Charlemagne, specifically to denote the royal hunting grounds of the king. The word was not endemic to the Romance languages, e.g., native words for forest in the Romance languages derived from the Latin silva, which denoted forest, and woodland cf., the English silva and sylvan, the Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese selva, the Romanian silva, the Old French selve. Cognates of forest in Romance languages, e.g., the Italian foresta, Spanish and Portuguese floresta, etc., are all ultimately derivations of the French word. A forest near Vinica, North Macedonia. The precise origin of medieval Latin foresta is obscure. Some authorities claim the word derives from the late Latin phrase forest ancilvum, denoting the outer wood. Others claim the word is a Latinization of the Frankish asterisk for hist, denoting forest, wooded country, and was assimilated to forest ancilvum, pursuant to the common practice of Frankish scribes. The High German forest denoting forest, Middle Low German forest denoting forest, Old English Fier denoting forest, woodland, game preserve, hunting ground, English frith and Old Norse Firi, denoting coniferous forest, all of which derive from the Proto-Germanic asterisk for hissa, furia, denoting a fir wood, coniferous forest, from the Proto-Indo-European asterisk for q, denoting a coniferous or mountain forest, wooded height, all attest to the Frankish asterisk for hist. Uses of forest in English to denote any uninhabited and unenclosed area are presently considered archaic. 27. The Norman rulers of England introduced the word as a legal term, as seen in Latin texts such as Magna Carta, to denote uncultivated land that was legally designated for hunting by feudal nobility, see royal forest. 27. 28. These hunting forests did not necessarily contain any trees. Because that often included significant areas of woodland, forest eventually came to connote woodland in general, regardless of tree density. By the beginning of the 14th century, English texts use the word in all three of its senses, common, legal, and archaic. 27. Other English words used to denote an area with a high density of trees are firth, frith, holt, weald, wold, wood, and woodland. Unlike forest, these are all derived from Old English and were not borrowed from another language. Some present classifications reserve woodland for denoting a locale with more open space between trees, and distinguish kinds of woodlands as open forests and closed forests, premised on their crown covers. 29. Silva plural silvaere. Less classically, silvas is a peculiar English spelling of the Latin silva, denoting a woodland, and has precedent in English, including its plural forms. While its use as a synonym of forest, and as a Latinate word denoting a woodland, may be admitted, in a specific technical sense it is restricted to denoting the species of trees that comprise the woodlands of a region, as in its sense in the subject of silviculture. 30. The resorting to silva in English indicates more precisely the denotation that the use of forest intends. Evolutionary history. The first forests on Earth arose in the Middle Devonian, approximately 390 million years ago, with the evolution of cladoxylopsid plants like Calamophyton. 30. Appeared in the late Devonian. Archaeopteris was both tree-like and fern-like plant, growing to 20 meters 66 feet in height or more. 32. It quickly spread throughout the world, from the equator to subpolar latitudes. 32. It is the first species known to cast shade due to its fronds and forming soil from its roots. Archaeopteris was deciduous, dropping its fronds onto the forest floor, the shade, soil, and forest stuff from the dropped fronds creating the early forest. 32. The shed organic matter altered the freshwater environment, slowing its flow and providing food. This promoted freshwater fish. 32. Ecology. Temperate rainforest in Tasmania's Hellyer Gorge. Forests account for 75% of the gross primary productivity of the Earth's biosphere, and contain 80% of the Earth's plant biomass. 8. Biomass per unit area is high compared to other vegetation communities. Much of this biomass occurs below ground in the root systems and is partially decomposed plant detritus. The woody component of a forest contains lignin, which is relatively slow to decompose compared with other organic materials such as cellulose or carbohydrate. The world's forests contain about 606 gigatons of living biomass above and below ground and 59 gigatons of deadwood. The total biomass has decreased slightly since 1990, but biomass per unit area has increased. 33. Forest ecosystems broadly differ based on climate. Latitudes 10 degrees north and south of the equator are mostly covered in tropical rainforest, and the latitudes between 53 degrees north and 67 degrees north have boreal forest. As a general rule, forests dominated by angiosperms broadleaf forests are more species-rich than those dominated by gymnosperms conifer, montane, or needle-leaf forests, although exceptions exist. The trees that form the principal structural and defining component of a forest may be of a great variety of species, as in tropical rainforests and temperate deciduous forests, or relatively few species over large areas, e.g., taiga and arid montane coniferous forests. The biodiversity of forests also encompasses shrubs, herbaceous plants, mosses, ferns, lichens, fungi, and a variety of animals. Trees rising up to 35 meters 115 feet in height add a vertical dimension to the area of land that can support plant and animal species, opening up numerous ecological niches for arboreal animal species, epiphytes, and various species that thrive under the regulated microclimate created under the canopy. 34. Forests have intricate three-dimensional structures that increase in complexity with lower levels of disturbance and greater variety of tree species. 35. The biodiversity of forests varies considerably according to factors such as forest type, geography, climate, and soils, in addition to human use. 36. Forest habitat in temperate regions support relatively few animal and plant species, and species that tend to have large geographical distributions, while the montane forests of Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and lowland forests of Australia, coastal Brazil, the Caribbean islands, Central America, and insular Southeast Asia have many species with small geographical distributions. 36. Dense human populations and intense agricultural land use, such as Europe, parts of Bangladesh, China, India, and North America, are less intact in terms of their biodiversity. 36. Northern Africa, Southern Australia, coastal Brazil, Madagascar, and South Africa are also identified as areas with striking losses in biodiversity intactness. 36. Components. Even, dense old-growth stand of beech trees, Fagus sylvatica, prepared to be regenerated by their saplings in the understory, in the Brussels part of the Sonian forest. A forest consists of many components that can be broadly divided into two categories, biotic living and abiotic non-living. The living parts include trees, shrubs, vines, grasses and other herbaceous non-woody plants, mosses, algae, fungi, insects, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and microorganisms living on the plants and animals and in the soil, connected by mycorrhizal networks. 37. Layers. Spiny forest at Ifat D, Madagascar, featuring various Adansonia baobab species, Aloadia procera. Madagascar ocotillo, and other vegetation. The main layers of all forest types are the forest floor, the understory, and the canopy. The emergent layer, above the canopy, exists in tropical rainforests. Each layer has a different set of plants and animals, depending upon the availability of sunlight, moisture, and food. The forest floor is covered in dead plant material such as fallen leaves and decomposing logs, which detritivores break down into new soil. The layer of decaying leaves that covers the soil is necessary for many insects to overwinter and for amphibians, birds, and other animals to shelter and forage for food. Leaf litter also keeps the soil moist, stops erosion, and protects roots against extreme heat and cold. 38. The fungal mycelium that helps form the mycorrhizal network transmits nutrients from decaying material to trees and other plants. The forest floor supports a variety of plants, ferns, grasses, and tree seedlings, as well as animals such as ants, amphibians, spiders, and millipedes. Understory is made up of bushes, shrubs, and young trees that are adapted to living in the shade of the canopy. Canopy is formed by the mass of intertwined branches, twigs, and leaves of mature trees. The crowns of the dominant trees receive most of the sunlight. This is the most productive part of the trees, where maximum food is produced. The canopy forms a shady, protective umbrella over the rest of the forest. Emergent layer exists in a tropical rainforest and is composed of a few scattered trees that tower over the canopy. 39. In botany in countries like Germany and Poland, a different classification of forest vegetation is often used. Tree, shrub, herb, and moss layers. See stratification, vegetation. Types. Casentinaceae forests, Italy. Forests are classified differently and to different degrees of specificity. One such classification is in terms of the biomes in which they exist, combined with leaf longevity of the dominant species, whether they are evergreen or deciduous. Another distinction is whether the forests are composed predominantly of broadleaf trees, coniferous needle-leaved trees, or mixed. Boreal forests occupy the subarctic zone and are generally evergreen and coniferous. Temperate zones support both broadleaf deciduous forests, e.g., temperate deciduous forest, and evergreen coniferous forests, e.g., temperate coniferous forests and temperate rainforests. Warm temperate zones support broadleaf evergreen forests, including laurel forests. Tropical and subtropical forests include tropical and subtropical moist forests, tropical and subtropical dry forests, and tropical and subtropical coniferous forests. Forests are classified according to physiognomy based on their overall physical structure or developmental stage, e.g. old growth versus second growth. Forests can also be classified more specifically based on the climate and the dominant tree species present, resulting in numerous different forest types, e.g., ponderosa pine, Douglas fir forest. The number of trees in the world, according to a 2015 estimate, is 3 trillion, of which 1.4 trillion are in the tropics or subtropics, 0.6 trillion in the temperate zones, and 0.7 trillion in the coniferous boreal forests. The 2015 estimate is about 8 times higher than previous estimates, and is based on tree densities measured on over 400,000 plots. It remains subject to a wide margin of error, not least because the samples are mainly from Europe and North America. 40. Forests can also be classified according to the amount of human alteration. Old growth forest contains mainly natural patterns of biodiversity and established seral patterns, and they contain mainly species native to the region and habitat. In contrast, secondary forest is forest regrowing following timber harvest and may contain species originally from other regions or habitats. 41. Different global forest classification systems have been proposed, but none has gained universal acceptance. 42. UNEP WCMC's forest category classification system is a simplification of other, more complex systems, e.g. UNESCO's forest and woodland subformations. This system divides the world's forests into 26 major types, which reflect climatic zones as well as the principal types of trees. These 26 major types can be reclassified into 6 broader categories: temperate needleleaf, temperate broadleaf and mixed, tropical moist, tropical dry, sparse trees and parkland, and forest plantations. 42. Each category is described in a separate section below. Temperate needleleaf. Temperate forests mostly occupy the higher latitudes of the northern hemisphere, as well as some warm temperate areas, especially on nutrient-poor or otherwise unfavorable soils. These forests are composed entirely, or nearly so, of coniferous species Coniferophyta. In the northern hemisphere, pines Pinus, spruces Picea, larches Larix, firs Abies, Douglas fir Pseudotsuga, and hemlock Tsuga make up the canopy, but other taxa are also important. In the hemisphere, most coniferous trees, members of Araucariaceae and Podocarpaceae, occur mixed with broadleaf species, and are classed as broadleaf and mixed forests. 42. Temperate broadleaf and mixed. Broadleaf forest in Bhutan. Temperate broadleaf and mixed forests include a substantial component of trees of the Anthophyta group. They are generally characteristic of the warmer temperate latitudes, but extend to cool temperate ones, particularly in the southern hemisphere. They include such forest types as the mixed deciduous forests of the United States and their counterparts in China and Japan, the broadleaf evergreen rainforests of Japan, Chile, and Tasmania, the sclerophyllous forests of Australia, central Chile, the Mediterranean, and California, and the southern beech Nothofagus forests of Chile and New Zealand. 42. Tropical moist. There are many different types of tropical moist forests, with lowland evergreen broadleaf tropical rainforests, for example Varzea indigo forests and the terra firme forests of the Amazon basin, the peat swamp forests, dipterocarp forests of Southeast Asia, and the high forests of the Congo basin. Seasonal tropical forests, perhaps the best description for the colloquial term, jungle, typically range from the rainforest zone 10 degrees north or south of the equator, to the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. Forests located on mountains are also included in this category, divided largely into upper and lower montane formations, on the basis of the variation of physiognomy corresponding to changes in altitude. 43. Tropical dry. Tropical dry forests are characteristic of areas in the tropics affected by seasonal drought. The seasonality of rainfall is usually reflected in the deciduousness of the forest canopy, with most trees being leafless for several months of the year. Under some conditions, such as less fertile soils or less predictable drought regimes, the proportion of evergreen species increases and the forests are characterized as sclerophyllous. Thorn forest, a dense forest of low stature with a high frequency of thorny or spiny species, is found where drought is prolonged, and especially where grazing animals are plentiful. On very poor soils, and especially where fire or herbivore are recurrent phenomena, savannas develop. 42. Sparse trees in savanna. Sparse trees in savanna are forests with sparse tree canopy cover. They occur principally in areas of transition from forested to non-forested landscapes. The major zones in which these ecosystems occur are in the boreal region and in the seasonally dry tropics. High latitudes, north of the main zone of boreal forest land, growing conditions are not adequate to maintain a continuously closed forest cover, so tree cover is both sparse and discontinuous. This vegetation is variously called open taiga, open lichen woodland, and forest tundra. A savanna is a mixed woodland grassland ecosystem characterized by the trees being sufficiently widely spaced so that the canopy does not close. The open canopy allows sufficient light to reach the ground to support an unbroken herbaceous layer that consists primarily of grasses. Savannas maintain an open canopy despite a high tree density. 42. Plantations. Forest plantations are generally intended for the production of timber and pulpwood. Commonly monospecific, planted with even spacing between the trees, and intensively managed, these forests are generally important as habitat for native biodiversity. Some are managed in ways that enhance their biodiversity protection functions and can provide ecosystem services such as nutrient capital maintenance, watershed and soil structure protection and carbon storage. 41. 42. Area. Share of land that is covered by forest. The annual net loss of forest area has decreased since 1990, but the world is not on track to meet the target of the United Nations Strategic Plan for Forests to increase forest area by 3% by 2030. 36. Share of forest area in total land area, top countries 2021. While deforestation is taking place in some areas, new forests are being established through natural expansion or deliberate efforts in other areas. As a result, the net loss of forest area is less than the rate of deforestation, and it, too, is decreasing, from 7.8 million hectares 19 million acres per year in the 1990s to 4.7 million hectares 12 million acres per year during 2010-2020. 36. In absolute terms, the global forest area decreased by 178 million hectares, 440 million acres, 1,780,000 square kilometers, 690,000 square miles between 1990 and 2020, which is an area about the size of Libya. 36. Societal significance. Redwood tree in Northern California redwood forest, where many redwood trees are managed for preservation and longevity, rather than being harvested for wood production. Burn forest on Pasos. Ecosystem services. Forests provide a diversity of ecosystem services including converting carbon dioxide into oxygen and biomass. A full-grown tree produces about 100 kilograms, 220 pounds of net oxygen per year. 44. Acting as a carbon sink. Therefore, they are necessary to mitigate climate change. 45. Aiding and regulating climate. For example, research from 2017 shows that forests induce rainfall. If the forest is cut, it can lead to drought. 46. And in the tropics to occupational heat stress of outdoor workers. 47. Purifying water. Mitigating natural hazards such as floods. Serving as a genetic reserve. Serving as a source of lumber and as recreational areas. Serving as a source of woodlands and trees for millions of people dependent almost entirely on forests for subsistence for their essential fuel wood, food, and fodder needs. 48. The main ecosystem services can be summarized in the next table. 49. Main ecosystem services of the three main types of forest type of forest. Carbon stored biodiversity other. Primary boreal forests 1,042 billion tons of carbon, more than currently found in the atmosphere, 2 times more than all human-caused emissions since the year 1870. Biodiversity services given by Canada Forest alone are estimated at $703 billion per year. Important for almost half of the birds in North America. Contains 60% of world surface freshwater. Primary. Temperate forests. 119 billion tons, like all CO2 emitted by humans in 2005-2017, old-growth forest has very high biodiversity. Some species link terrestrial ecosystems to marine. Some trees can live 1,000 years providing many services to humans. Help to protect people from floods and droughts. Primary tropical forests 471 billion tons, more than all CO2 emissions from fossil fuel industry from the year 1750, contain about 2/3 of all species of terrestrial animals and plants. Creates clouds, rainfall. Some researchers state that forests do not only provide benefits, but can in certain cases also incur costs to humans. 50. 51. Forests may impose an economic burden. 52. 53. Diminish the enjoyment of natural areas. 54. Reduce the food-producing capacity of grazing land. 55. And cultivated land. 56. Reduce biodiversity. 57. 58. Reduce available water for humans and wildlife. 59. 60. Harbor dangers or destructive wildlife. 50. 61. And act as reservoirs of human and livestock disease. 62. 63. An important consideration regarding carbon sequestration is that forests can turn from a carbon sink to a carbon source if plant diversity, density or forest area decreases, as has been observed in different tropical forests. 64. 65. 66. The typical tropical forest may become a carbon source by the 2060s. 67. An assessment of European forests found early signs of carbon sink saturation, after decades of increasing strength. 68. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change (IPCC) concluded that a combination of measures aimed at increasing forest carbon stocks and sustainable timber offtake will generate the largest carbon sequestration benefit. 69. Forest-dependent people. The term forest-dependent people is used to describe any of a wide variety of livelihoods that are dependent on access to forests, products harvested from forests, or ecosystem services provided by forests, including those of indigenous peoples dependent on forests. 70. In India, approximately 22% of the population belongs to forest-dependent communities, which live in close proximity to forests and practice agroforestry as a principal part of their livelihood. 71. People of Ghana who rely on timber and bushmeat harvested from forests and indigenous peoples of the Amazon rainforest are also examples of forest-dependent people. 70. Though forest dependence by more common definitions is statistically associated with poverty and rural livelihoods, elements of forest dependence exist in communities with a wide range of characteristics. Generally, richer households derive more cash value from forest resources, whereas among poor households, forest resources are more important for home consumption and increase community resilience. 72. Indigenous peoples. Forests are fundamental to the culture and livelihood of indigenous people groups that live in and depend on forests. 73. Many of which have been removed from and denied access to the lands on which they live as part of global colonialism. Indigenous lands contain 36% or more of intact forests worldwide, host more biodiversity, and experience less deforestation. 74. 75. 76. Indigenous activists have argued that degradation of forests and indigenous peoples' marginalization and land dispossession are interconnected. 77. 78. Other concerns among indigenous peoples include lack of indigenous involvement in forest management and loss of knowledge related for the forest ecosystem. 79. Since 2002, the amount of land that is legally owned by or designated for indigenous peoples has broadly increased, but land acquisition in lower-income countries by multinational corporations, often with little or no consultation of indigenous peoples, has also increased. 80. Research in the Amazon rainforest suggests that indigenous methods of agroforestry form reservoirs of biodiversity. 81. In the U.S. state of Wisconsin, forests managed by indigenous people have more plant diversity, fewer invasive species, higher tree regeneration rates, and higher volume of trees. 82. Management. World production of selected forest products. Forest management has changed considerably over the last few centuries, with rapid changes from the 1980s onward, culminating in a practice now referred to as sustainable forest management. Forest ecologists concentrate on forest patterns and processes, usually with the aim of elucidating cause and effect relationships. Forests who practice sustainable forest management focus on the integration of ecological, social, and economic values, often in consultation with local communities and other stakeholders. Priest River winding through Whitetail Butte with lots of forestry to the east, these lot patterns have existed since the mid-19th century. The white patches reflect areas with younger, smaller trees, where winter snow cover shows up brightly to the astronauts. Dark green-brown squares or parcels. Humans have generally decreased the amount of forest worldwide. Anthropogenic factors that can affect forests include logging, urban sprawl, human-caused forest fires, acid rain, invasive species, and the slash-and-burn practices of swidden agriculture or shifting cultivation. Loss and regrowth of forests led to a distinction between two broad types of forest, primary or old-growth forest and secondary forest. There are also many natural factors that can cause changes in forests over time, including forest fires, insects, diseases, weather, competition between species, etc. In 1997, the World Resources Institute recorded that only 20% of the world's original forests remained in large intact tracts of undisturbed forest. 83, more than 75% of these intact forests lie in three countries, the boreal forests of Russia and Canada, and the rainforests of Brazil. According to Food and Agriculture Organization's FAO Global Forest Resources Assessment 2020, an estimated 420 million hectares, 1.0 billion acres of forest have been lost worldwide through deforestation since 1990, but the rate of forest loss has declined substantially. In the most period, 2015-2020, the annual rate of deforestation was estimated at 10 million hectares, 25 million acres, down from 12 million hectares, 30 million acres annually in 2010-2015. 33. The forest transition. The transition of a region from forest loss to net gain in forested land is referred to as the forest transition. This change occurs through a few main pathways, including increase in commercial tree plantations, adoption of agroforestry techniques by small farmers, or spontaneous regeneration when former agricultural land is abandoned. It can be motivated by the economic benefits of forests, the ecosystem services forests provide, or cultural changes where people increasingly appreciate forests for their spiritual, aesthetic, or otherwise intrinsic value. D4, according to the special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, to avoid temperature rise by more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, there will need to be an increase in global forest cover equal to the land area of Canada, 10 million square kilometers, 3.9 million square miles by 2050. 45. China instituted a ban on logging, beginning in 1998, due to the erosion and flooding that it caused. 85. In addition, ambitious tree planting programs in countries such as China, India, the United States, and Vietnam, combined with natural expansion of forests in some regions, have added more than 7 million hectares, 17 million acres of new forests annually. As a result, the net loss of forest area was reduced to 5.2 million hectares, 13 million acres per year between 2000 and 2010, down from 8.3 million hectares, 21 million acres annually in the 1990s. In 2015, a study for Nature Climate Change showed that the trend has recently been reversed, leading to an overall gain in global biomass in forests. This gain is due especially to reforestation in China and Russia. 86 new forests are not equivalent to old-growth forests in terms of species diversity, resilience, and carbon capture. On the 7th of September 2015, the FAO released a new study stating that over the last 25 years the global deforestation rate has decreased by 50% due to improved management of forests and greater government protection. 87, 88. Portion of forest in protected areas, by region, 2020-33. There is an estimated 726 million hectares, 1.79 billion acres, of forest in protected areas worldwide. Of the 6 major world regions, South America has the highest share of forests in protected areas, at 31%. The area of such areas globally has increased by 191 million hectares, 470 million acres, since 1990, but the rate of annual increase slowed in 2010-2020. 33. Smaller areas of woodland in cities may be managed as urban forestry, sometimes within public parks. These are often created for human benefits. Attention restoration theory argues that spending time in nature reduces stress and improves health, while forest schools and kindergartens help young people to develop social as well as scientific skills in forests. These typically need to be close to where the children live. Canada. Garibaldi Provincial Park, British Columbia. Canada has about 4 million square kilometers, 1.5 million square miles, of forest land. More than 90% of forest land is publicly owned and about 50% of the total forest area is allocated for harvesting. These allocated areas are managed using the principles of sustainable forest management, which include extensive consultation with local stakeholders. About 8% of Canada's forest is legally protected from resource development. 89-90. Much more forest land, about 40% of the total forest land base, is subject to varying degrees of protection through processes such as integrated land use planning or defined management areas, such as certified forests. 90. By November 2006, over 1.2 million square kilometers, 460,000 square miles, of forest land in Canada, about half the global total, had been certified as being sustainably managed. 91. Clearcutting, first used in the latter half of the 20th century, is less expensive, but devastating to the environment, and companies are required by law to ensure that harvested areas are adequately regenerated. Most Canadian provinces have regulations limiting the size of new clearcuts, although some older ones grew to 110 square kilometers, 42 square miles over several years. The Canadian Forest Service is the government department which looks after forests in Canada. Latvia. Latvia Pine Forest in Kēgums Municipality. Latvia has about 3.27 million hectares, 8.1 million acres, 12,600 square miles, of forest land, which equates to about 50.5% of Latvia's total area of 64,590 square kilometers, 24,938 square miles, 1.51 million hectares, 3.7 million acres, of forest land. 46% of total forest land is publicly owned and 1.75 million hectares, 4.3 million acres, of forest land. 54% of the total is in private hands. Latvia's forests have been steadily increasing over the years, which is in contrast to many other nations, mostly due to the forestation of land not used for agriculture. In 1935, there were only 1.757 million hectares, 4.34 million acres, of forest. Today this has increased by more than 150%. Birch is the most common tree at 28.2%, followed by pine 26.9%, spruce 18.3%, gray alder 9.7%, aspen 8.0%, black alder 5.7%, oak, ash 1.2%, with other hardwood trees making up the rest. 2.0%. 92-93. United States. In the United States, most forests have historically been affected by humans to some degree, though in recent years improved forestry practices have helped regulate or moderate large-scale impacts. The United States Forest Service estimated a net loss of about 2 million hectares, 4.9 million acres between 1997 and 2020. This estimate includes conversion of forest land to other. Ecology portal. Environment portal. Trees portal. Uses, including urban and suburban development, as well as afforestation and natural reversion of abandoned crop and pasture land to forest. In many areas of the United States, the area of forest is stable or increasing, particularly in many northern states. The opposite problem from flooding has plagued national forests, with loggers complaining that a lack of thinning and proper forest management has resulted in large forest fires. 94-95. Bioproducts. Close to nature forestry cloud forest. Dendrology. Dendrometry. Forest dynamics. Forest migration. Forest pathology. Kelp forest, a forest made mostly if not entirely of kelp, and underwater forest. List of countries by forest area. List of national forests of the United States. List of old-growth forests. Mangrove forest. Permaforestry. Red plus. Urban forest. Wilderness. Woodland management. Woodland. This article incorporates text from a free content work. Licensed under CC by SA 3.0. License statement permission. Ment _2020 %E 2% 80% 93 key findings.pdf. Text taken from Global Forest Resource Assessment 2020 Key Findings. FAO. This article incorporates text from a free content work. Licensed under CC by SA 3.0. License statement permission. %99s _forests _2020. _in .pdf. Text taken from the State of the World's Forests 2020. In brief, forests, biodiversity and people. FAO and UNEP. 1 Global Forest Resources Assessment 2020 Key Findings. Rome. FAO 2020. See also. Sources. References. Animal cognition. Animal cognition encompasses the mental capacities of non-human animals, including insect cognition. The study of animal conditioning and learning used in this field was developed from comparative psychology. Animal cognition. Animal cognition encompasses the mental capacities of non-human animals, including insect cognition. The study of animal conditioning and learning used in this field was developed from comparative psychology. It has also been strongly influenced by research in ethology, behavioral ecology, and evolutionary psychology. The alternative name cognitive ethology is sometimes used. Many behaviors associated with the term animal intelligence are also subsumed within animal cognition. 1. A crab eating macaque using a stone tool to crack open a nut. Experiment like the string pulling task performed here by Carib Grackle provide insights into animal cognition. Researchers have examined animal cognition in mammals, especially primates, cetaceans, elephants, bears, dogs, cats, pigs, horses, 2, 3, 4 cattle, raccoons and rodents, birds including parrots, fowl, corvids and pigeons, reptiles, lizards, snakes, and turtles, 5 fish and invertebrates including cephalopods, spiders and insects. 6. Historical background. Early inferences. A monkey drinking fruit tea from a juice box using its hands. The mind and behavior of non-human animals has captivated the human imagination for centuries. Many writers, such as Descartes, have speculated about the presence or absence of the animal mind. 7. These speculations led to many observations of animal behavior before modern science and testing were available. This ultimately resulted in the creation of multiple hypotheses about animal intelligence. One of Aesop's fables was The Crow and the Pitcher, in which a crow drops pebbles into a vessel of water until he is able to drink. This was a relatively accurate reflection of the capability of corvids to understand water displacement. 8. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder was the earliest to attest that said story reflects the behavior of real-life corvids. 9. Aristotle, in his Biology, hypothesized a causal chain where an animal's sense organs transmitted information to an organ capable of making decisions, and then to a motor organ. Despite Aristotle's cardiocentrism, mistaken belief that cognition occurred in the heart, this approached some modern understandings of information processing. 10. Early inferences were not necessarily precise or accurate. Nonetheless, interest in animal mental abilities, and comparisons to humans, increased with early myrmecology, the study of ant behavior, as well as the classification of humans as primates beginning with Linnaeus. Morgan's Canon. Coined by 19th-century British psychologist C. Lloyd Morgan, Morgan's Canon remains a fundamental precept of comparative animal psychology. In its developed form, it states that 11. In cases an animal activity to be interpreted in terms of higher psychological processes if it can be fairly interpreted in terms of processes which stand lower in the scale of psychological evolution and development. In other words, Morgan believed that anthropomorphic approaches to animal behavior were fallacious, and that people should only consider behavior as, for example, rational, purposive or affectionate, if there is no other explanation in terms of the behaviors of more primitive life forms to which we do not attribute those faculties. From anecdote to laboratory. Speculating about animal intelligence gradually yielded to scientific study after Darwin placed humans and animals on a continuum, although Darwin's largely anecdotal approach to the cognition topic would not pass scientific muster later on. 12. This method would be expanded by his protege George J. Romanes, 13, who played a key role in the defense of Darwinism and its refinement over the years. Still, Romanes is most famous for two major flaws in his work, his focus on anecdotal observations and entrenched anthropomorphism. 14. Unsatisfied with the previous approach, E.L. Thorndike brought animal behavior into the laboratory for objective scrutiny. Thorndike's careful observations of the escape of cats, dogs, and chicks from puzzle boxes led him to conclude that what appears to the naive human observer to be intelligent behavior may be strictly attributable to simple associations. According to Thorndike, using Morgan's canon, the inference of animal reason, insight, or consciousness is unnecessary and misleading. 15. At about the same time, I.P. Pavlov began his seminal studies of conditioned reflexes in dogs. Pavlov quickly abandoned attempts to infer canine mental processes. Such attempts, he said, led only to disagreement and confusion. He was, however, willing to propose unseen physiological processes that might explain his observations. 16. The behavioristic half-century. The work of Thorndike, Pavlov and a little later of the outspoken behaviorist John B. Watson, 17, set the direction of much research on animal behavior for more than half a century. During this time there was considerable progress in understanding simple associations. Notably, around 1930 the differences between Thorndike's instrumental, or operant conditioning and Pavlov's classical, or Pavlovian conditioning were clarified, first by Miller and Konorsky, and then by B.F. Skinner. 19. Many experiments on conditioning followed. They generated some complex theories. 20. But they made little or no reference to intervening mental processes. Probably the most explicit dismissal of the idea that mental processes control behavior was the radical behaviorism of Skinner. This view seeks to explain behavior, including private events, like mental images, solely by reference to the environmental contingencies impinging on the human or animal. 21. Despite the predominantly behaviorist orientation of research before 1960, the rejection of mental processes in animals was not universal during those years. Influential exceptions included, for example, Wolfgang Kohler and his Insightful Chimpanzees, 22, and Edward Tolman, whose proposed cognitive map was a significant contribution to subsequent cognitive research in both humans and animals. 23. The cognitive revolution. Beginning around 1960, a cognitive revolution in research on humans, 24, gradually spurred a similar transformation of research with animals. Inference to processes not directly observable became acceptable and then commonplace. An important proponent of this shift in thinking was Donald O. Hebb, who argued that mind is simply a name for processes in the head that control complex behavior, and that it is both necessary and possible to infer those processes from behavior. 25. Animals came to be seen as goal-seeking agents that acquire, store, retrieve, and internally process information at many levels of cognitive complexity. 26. Methods. The acceleration of research on animal cognition in the last 50 years or so has led to a rapid expansion in the variety of species studied and methods employed. The remarkable behavior of large-brained animals such as primates and cetacea have claimed special attention, but all sorts of animals, large and small, birds, fish, ants, bees, and others have been brought into the laboratory or observed in carefully controlled field studies. In the laboratory, animals push levers, pull strings, dig for food, swim in water mazes, or respond to images on computer screens to get information for discrimination, attention, memory, and categorization experiments. 27. Careful field studies explore memory for food caches, navigation by stars. 28. Communication, tool use, identification of conspecifics, and many other matters. Studies focus on the behavior of animals in their natural environments and discuss the putative function of the behavior for the propagation and survival of the species. These developments reflect an increased cross-fertilization from related fields such as ethology and behavioral ecology. Contributions from behavioral neuroscience are beginning to clarify the physiological substrate of some inferred mental process. Researchers have made effective use of a Piagetian methodology, taking tasks which human children are known to master at different stages of development and investigating which of them can be performed by particular species. Other by concerns for animal welfare and the management of domestic species. For example, Temple Grandin has harnessed her unique expertise in animal welfare and the ethical treatment of farm livestock to highlight underlying similarities between humans and other animals. 29. From a methodological point of view, one of the main risks in this sort of work is anthropomorphism, the tendency to interpret an animal's behavior in terms of human feelings, thoughts, and motivations. 1. Research questions. The common chimpanzee can use tools. This individual is using a stick to get food. Human and non-human animal cognition have much in common, and this is reflected in the research summarized below. Most of the headings found here might also appear in an article on human cognition. Of course, research in the two also differs in important respects. Notably, much research with humans either studies or involves language, and much research with animals is related directly or indirectly to behaviors important to survival in natural settings. Following are summaries of some of the major areas of research in animal cognition. Perception. Animals process information from eyes, ears, and other sensory organs to perceive the environment. Perceptual processes have been studied in many species, with results that are often similar to those in humans. Equally interesting are those perceptual processes that differ from, or go beyond those found in humans, such as echolocation in bats and dolphins, motion detection by skin receptors in fish, and extraordinary visual acuity, motion sensitivity and ability to see ultraviolet light in some birds. 30. Attention. Much of what is happening in the world at any moment is irrelevant to current behavior. Attention refers to mental processes that select relevant information, inhibit irrelevant information, and switch among these as the situation demands. 31. Often the selective process is tuned before relevant information appears. Such expectation makes for rapid selection of key stimuli when they become available. A large body of research has explored the way attention and expectation affect the behavior of non-human animals, and much of this work suggests that attention operates in birds, mammals and reptiles in much the same way that it does in humans. 32. Selective learning. Animals trained to discriminate between two stimuli, say black versus white, can be said to attend to the brightness dimension, but this says little about whether this dimension is selected in preference to others. More enlightenment comes from experiments that allow the animal to choose from several alternatives. For example, several studies have shown that performance is better on, for example, a color discrimination e.g. blue versus green, after the animal has learned another color discrimination e.g. red versus orange, than it is after training on a different dimension such as an X shape versus an O shape. The reverse effect happens after training on forms. Thus, the earlier learning appears to affect which dimension, color or form, the animal will attend to. 33. Other experiments have shown that after animals have learned to respond to one aspect of the environment, responsiveness to other aspects is suppressed. In blocking, for example, an animal is conditioned to respond to one stimulus A, by pairing that stimulus with reward or punishment. After the animal responds consistently to A second stimulus B accompanies on additional training trials. Later tests with the B stimulus alone elicit little response, suggesting that learning about B has been blocked by prior learning about A. 34. This result supports the hypothesis that stimuli are neglected if they fail to provide new information. The experiment just cited, the animal failed to attend to B because B added no information to that supplied by if true. This interpretation is an important insight into attentional processing, but this conclusion remains uncertain because blocking and several related phenomena can be explained by models of conditioning that do not invoke attention. 35. Divided attention. Attention is a limited resource and is not a none or all response. The more attention devoted to one aspect of the environment, the less is available for others. 36. A number of experiments have studied this in animals. In one experiment, a tone and a light are presented simultaneously to pigeons. The pigeons gain a reward only by choosing the correct combination of the two stimuli, e.g. a high-frequency tone together with a yellow light. The birds perform well at this task, presumably by dividing attention between the two stimuli. When only one of the stimuli varies and the other is presented at its rewarded value, discrimination improves on the variable stimulus but discrimination on the alternative stimulus worsens. 37. These outcomes are consistent with the notion that attention is a limited resource that can be more or less focused among incoming stimuli. Visual search and attentional priming. As noted above, the function of attention is to select information that is of special use to the animal. Visual search typically calls for this sort of selection, and search tasks have been used extensively in both humans and animals to determine the characteristics of attentional selection and the factors that control it. Experimental research on visual search in animals was initially prompted by field observations published by Luke Tinbergen, 1960. 38. Tinbergen observed that birds are selective when foraging for insects. For example, he found that birds tended to catch the same type of insect repeatedly even though several types were available. Tinbergen suggested that this prey selection was caused by an attentional bias that improved detection of one type of insect while suppressing detection of others. This, attentional priming, is commonly said to result from a pretrial activation of a mental representation of the attended object, which Tinbergen called a searching image. Tinbergen's field observations on priming have been supported by a number of experiments. For example, Pietrowicz and Camille, 1977, 1979, 3940, presented blue jays with pictures of tree trunks upon which rested either a moth of species A moth of species B, or no moth at all. The birds were rewarded for pecks at a picture showing a moth. Crucially, the probability with which a particular species of moth was detected was higher after repeated trials with that species, e.g. A, than it was after a mixture of trials, e.g. A, B, A. These results suggest again that sequential encounters with an object can establish an attentional predisposition to see the object. Another way to produce attentional priming in search is to provide an advanced signal that is associated with the target. For example, if a person hears a song sparrow, he or she may be predisposed to detect a song sparrow in a shrub, or among other birds. A number of experiments have reproduced this effect in animal subjects. 41, 42. Still other experiments have explored nature of stimulus factors that affect the speed and accuracy of visual search. For example, the time taken to find a single target increases as the number of items in the visual field increases. This rise in reaction time is steep if the distractors are similar to the target, less steep if they are dissimilar, and may not occur if the distractors are very different from the target in form or color. 43. Concepts and categories. Fundamental but difficult to define, the concept of concept was discussed for hundreds of years by philosophers before it became a focus of psychological study. Concepts enable humans and animals to organize the world into functional groups. The groups may be composed of perceptually similar objects or events, diverse things that have a common function, relationships such as same versus different, or relations among relations such as analogies. 44. Extensive discussions on these matters together with many references may be found in Shuttleworth, 2010, 1 Wasserman and Zental, 2006, 27, and in Zental et al. 2008. The latter is freely available online. 45. Methods. Most work on animal concepts has been done with visual stimuli, which can easily be constructed and presented in great variety, but auditory and other stimuli have been used as well. 46. Pigeons have been widely used, for they have excellent vision and are readily conditioned to respond to visual targets. Other birds and a number of other animals have been studied as well. 1. In a typical experiment, a bird or other animal confronts a computer monitor on which a large number of pictures appear one by one, and the subject gets a reward for pecking or touching a picture of a category item and no reward for non-category items. Alternatively, a subject may be offered a choice between 2 or more pictures. Many experiments end with the presentation of items never seen before. Successful sorting of these items shows that the animal has not simply learned many specific stimulus-response associations. A related method, sometimes used to study relational concepts, is matching to sample. In this task, an animal sees one stimulus and then chooses between 2 or more alternatives, one of which is the same as the first. The animal is then rewarded for choosing the matching stimulus. 127.45. Perceptual categories. Perceptual categorization is said to occur when a person or animal responds in a similar way to a range of stimuli that share common features. For example, a squirrel climbs a tree when it sees Rex, Shep, or Trixie, which suggests that it categorizes all three as something to avoid. This sorting of instances into groups is crucial to survival. Among other things, an animal must categorize if it is to apply learning about one object, e.g. Rex bit meat to new instances of that category, dogs may bite. 127.45. Natural categories. Many animals readily classify objects by perceived differences in form or color. For example, bees or pigeons quickly learn to choose any red object and reject any green object if red leads to reward and green does not. Seemingly much more difficult is an animal's ability to categorize natural objects that vary a great deal in color and form even while belonging to the same group. In a classic study, Richard J. Herrnstein trained pigeons to respond to the presence or absence of human beings in photographs. 47. The birds readily learn to peck photos that contain partial or full views of humans and to avoid pecking photos with no human, despite great differences in the form, size, and color of both the humans displayed in and the non-human pictures. In studies, pigeons categorized other natural objects, e.g. trees, and after training they were able without reward to sort photos they had not seen before. 849. Similar work has been done with natural auditory categories, for example, bird songs. 50. Honeybees, Apis mellifera, are able to form concepts of up and down. 51. Functional or associative categories. Perceptually unrelated stimuli may come to be responded to as members of a class if they have a common use or lead to common consequences. An oft-cited study by Bond 1988 provides an example. 52. Bond divided a large set of unrelated pictures into two arbitrary sets. A and B pigeons got food for pecking at pictures instead of but not for pecks at pictures instead B. After they had learned this task fairly well, the outcome was reversed. Items